All right, so I want to think about ranking PhD programs or doctorate degrees. I think that this is a really important thing for all of you to make this decision before you go into a doctorate degree or before you start thinking about what it means to get your, whether it's a PhD or a professional doctorate. I really want you to be clear of going into this. So if you don't know me, I'm Professor Dave Massack. I'm an Associate Professor of Innovation Strategy and Entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor for it, to help you out as much as I possibly can. All right, so there's lots of different ranking criteria that you can think about in terms of a doctorate degree. The first thing that everybody should focus on is the knowledge that's being created. And it's really hard to figure out what that knowledge actually looks like and the sort of sophistication of that knowledge. So what universities tend to do and what professors tend to do, what other PhDs tend to do, is they look at the ranking of the university. And so sometimes the ranking of the university actually matters in terms of the resources that people get. So if you're at the University of California, Berkeley, for example, they're probably going to have a lot more resources, although it's a public institution. It is a good public institution than going to the International School of Baklava, whatever that might be. Right? So if you're thinking about this, you have to think about the different rankings that you might have. So the Reciprocity Project has a ranking that's out there. Go help out with that. But you know, there's many different kinds of rankings that you can look at, right? I personally am not a great, I don't believe in rankings as a strong indicator. They're a loose indicator of what's going on. I think most people that sort of study this stuff would suggest this. I'm very well aware of the literature in this area, and what you would probably look at for to have a better sense is to look at who are the productive scientists, and not necessarily just in terms of the publications, but also the sort of quality of the ideas and things that they're thinking about. That stuff's really hard to figure out. So often you have to go from sort of subjective understanding. So going and talking to people is going to be very important in terms of where's a good program, where do people actually get developed, what would you say in terms of the knowledge that actually gets created there. Those are really, really important things in terms of the knowledge that's created. Now, you can also think about the different degrees that you can get in terms of, you know, are you going to create better knowledge from a social science degree or an engineering degree, a doctorate degree? I'm going to say that they're pretty different in terms of the insight that they're going to do. I actually had the opportunity to do a PhD in engineering, and I turned it down because that's not something that I was interested in. But if for another reason too, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I wasn't necessarily interested in that particular science, so that's a really important thing to think about. Of, you know, what is going on, and it tends to different programs have different style or different degrees. Doctorate degrees have sort of different styles, right? So professional degrees are going to be geared. They're going to create more professional-oriented or practitioner-oriented knowledge. Other programs that are more sort of the mother programs, I guess, right? You know, for us in the social sciences or in business, it might be like economics or sociology, psychology, all these kind of fields like that. Those tend to produce more sort of generic science, right? Which has greater impact, scientific impact sometimes. Although the stuff that's in business schools sometimes has enormous impact because we study, we study how organizations actually work, and how we sort of frame and think about that has, you know, different implications of what's going on. But you know, in an engineering program, it tends to be pretty practical, and so that knowledge that's created might be very applicable to a business immediately. And so there's a lot of nuances with what's going on there. So can you say one sort of set of knowledge is better than the other? No. But what I can say is that there's a lot more thoughtfulness sometimes in some things compared to others. And that's hard to measure. It's hard to sort of garner, and people struggle with figuring out what is that thoughtfulness and how do you sort of garner that. Some people might come up with a really thoughtful thing in like a year. Others might take 10 years. And how do we know what is like, how do we compare that, right? It's really hard to compare that. Okay, so another metric that you can look at is the financial outcomes that you're going to get. And I'm a big fan of that. It's actually why I went into a business school. This is called endogeneity, when people self-select into different programs based on the salaries that they're going to get. There's a reason why I did not choose to get a liberal arts degree or go into something that was very, that didn't have the same financial outcomes. There's a very strong reason for that. I actually made that choice. I rationally thought through this, kind of listed it out in terms of the outcomes I'm going to get and chose to get into that. Now, it's hard to do that because the competition increases dramatically to get into things that have better career outcomes. You can look at those different financial career outcomes, right? So generally, medicine, business, law, those kind of professional programs tend to do pretty good in terms of the doctorate degrees, in terms of the salaries that they're going to get. And that's because that, the world recognizes the value of that. And unfortunately, that's the reality that everybody lives in. You have to look at what the normative reality of this is. That's why people switch from anthropology to, they go and study business, and they study the economics of money, for example, through an anthropological lens. It's more lucrative, and you do see that switch all the time, right? Because it gets frustrating of you're doing the same thing, and we do the same thing. We're creating knowledge. Same thing, but you get paid in different scales. The culture, the science, all of that kind of stuff is different in the different fields, very much so. So that is different. There's always a big transition, and people don't realize that. There's this big transition. We see that a lot in like business schools because, we tend to have to retrain everybody to get trained in the sort of business school stuff. And that does happen, right? You see people that have amazing degrees and they have multiple, they have a doctorate degree and then they want to get into business, and so they have to take a business degree, and we sort of have to retrain and do all that kind of stuff, right? So that happens. That's an important thing to think about, right? So you got knowledge. You can look at the rankings for that as kind of an implicit indicator. You can look at salaries, for example. And by the way, if you didn't know this, at most American universities and most American states, you can look up the salaries of individual. You can even go to individual, faculty and professors and stuff to get that salary. However, that's not capturing the big picture, right? And you have to think about that. There's a massive selection effect that happens there. Right, so if you are in different institutions, you get paid differently. So if I was to be at some highfalutin institution, I'm going to get paid a lot more than a low-falutin institution, right? Like those are really different in terms of what you're going to have access to and the resources that you have access to. So keep that in mind, that there's a massive selection effect. The attrition rate for most doctoral programs, I would say, is somewhere around 50%. So of the people that start, only about half actually complete. And that's probably pretty universal across the board. It is hard. And then of those, only, half will get, a job that you'd probably recognize. And then of those, only, I would say 10% go to an institution that was really recognizable and everybody would understand what those are. Those are kind of what the numbers are in terms of what you're looking at. The other thing that you can think of is opportunities, right? So you got knowledge, you got the sort of salaries, expectations, all that kind of stuff, but then also think about the opportunities that you have from pursuing that particular degree. And that was a big thing for me, and that's why I actually chose to go into strategy and business, and I studied finance, all that kind of stuff at the doctoral level. And the reason was I was looking for opportunities, right? And having more opportunities to go in different directions and to think about different things was really important, right? So if things didn't work out for me, I would go into industry, right? And actually, when I started out, that's what my initial sort of belief was. I was going to go into industry first, but I sort of navigated towards academia after, once I became socialized, I guess, within the academic culture. So think of those opportunities and what you can do at the end of it. That's super important. Remember, those opportunities are, they differ a lot between different degrees and what you're actually going to do, right? So a professional doctorate, unfortunately, is going to lock you out of many different tenure track positions. So unfortunately, if you're interested in those, they cost a lot of money and they lock you out of tenure track positions at most places. And the reason is that the research pipeline you have, the sort of the prestige and all that kind of stuff really does matter to get into tenure track positions at a university. So what's the difference between a tenure track and non-tenure track position? Non-tenure track just allows you to teach, and you can go into administration often, which is valuable and an amazing career as well. And actually in administration, you probably make more than some of the faculty, and that is okay, right? You have to think about that as well in terms of what you're doing. But if you want to do the traditional, you're a traditional professor of some sort, it's not going to work out in your favor. Just generally does not. It's hard to see that happening often, unfortunately. So be well aware of that going into it, and that is going to be across the board. I know people have done professional doctorates, and you know, it's hard to break into what you would imagine as what a normal professor is. You're always on the non-tenure track line. So remember all of these things when you're doing that. So, you know, the knowledge that's getting created. So one more thing, the knowledge that's being created, it's not only like the smarts that people have, the resources that they have, but also that time and dedication towards something really does matter. You do gain a lot when you're doing that. And then the salaries that you're looking at, this is an important thing. Make sure you look at the different various salaries or whatever program you're looking at. See if you can find a different program that is the same thing, relatively doing similar things, but has a higher salary. It's going to benefit you a lot. And there's many programs like that. Despite what many people say, you can always find a different alternative route to study the same thing in a different area that's going to be more lucrative. It's true. You can definitely do that. And then the last thing is thinking about the opportunities that you have access to and the different directions that you can go into, because ultimately it might not work out for you. And you might not like it, and you might want to do something in the future. So if you're focused on one narrow, tiny thing, it's hard to break out of that. It's really if you get a doctorate, it's already very hard to break out of that. It's part of the reason why we see, you know, MBAs performing a lot better in the market than PhDs, even though, funny enough, you know, PhDs will end up learning a lot more than MBAs, and many of them are MBAs in a business school, right? They've already had that and they go back, but then they just become very narrow typecasted, and you have to think about that and the opportunities that you can get in the open market. So, by the way, that's why a finance PhD tends to do better, is that they do have a lot more open market positions available on Wall Street and different things like that, or within, you know, within economics, for example, they go work at a Federal Reserve Bank. Those things are real, and those opportunities are real, and that gives more choice for people to go in different directions. So if you like that, give me a thumbs up, do subscribe to the YouTube channel, take care, and good luck. Bye.